You've probably tried growing something at home that should have been simple and walked away quietly convinced you were the problem, and that's exactly what happened to me with sprouts. I followed the tutorials. I soaked the beans overnight, rinsed them dutifully every morning, kept them in a jar on the counter the way every guide told me to, and what I got consistently was a jar of thin, limp, slightly sour-smelling threads that I'd stare at for a moment before tipping into the bin. I tried different beans. I tried different jars. I tried rinsing more, rinsing less. Nothing worked reliably enough to make it worth doing again. And then I started paying attention to how Korean home cooks grow kongnamul bean sprouts, not as a weekend project, not as an experiment, but as a completely ordinary part of feeding their families. No special equipment, no grow lights, no complicated setup, just mung beans, a container with drainage holes, darkness, and a watering rhythm so specific and so consistent that it produces crisp, plump, genuinely beautiful sprouts in about 3 days. Every time when I finally understood what they were doing differently, I realized I hadn't been failing at sprouting. I'd just never been taught the right method. The difference between the Korean approach and the mason jar method that most Western sprouting guides teach comes down to one thing that sounds almost too simple to matter: drainage, not partial drainage. Not occasional drainage, complete unobstructed drainage every single time water touches the beans. Korean home cooks grow kongnamul in containers that have holes in the bottom. Because they understand something that jar-based methods miss entirely. Sprouts need water to grow, but they cannot live in water. Even a small puddle sitting at the bottom of a container for a few hours is enough to start rot. And once rot starts, the whole batch follows. This is why your jar sprouts smelled off. It wasn't you, it was the jar. Before you do anything else, sort out your container. A dedicated sprouting tray with drainage holes works perfectly. So does a colander set inside a larger bowl, or a clean plastic food container with holes poked through the bottom using a heated nail. Whatever you use, water needs to flow through it and away freely with no pooling underneath. Line the base with a piece of clean cotton cloth or a layer of cheesecloth to cushion the beans and prevent them from falling through larger gaps. That's your setup. It costs almost nothing and it's the foundation. Everything else depends on. Now the beans. You want mung beans, the small green-skinned ones available at most Asian grocery stores and easily ordered online. Look for beans that are uniform in color without many broken pieces or shriveled ones in the bag. Fresh beans sprout more reliably, so if you have a bag that's been sitting in the back of your pantry for a couple of years, it's worth getting a new one. 1 cup of dry mung beans will give you roughly 4 cups of finished sprouts, which is a useful amount to plan around. Rinse your beans under cool water first, picking out anything damaged or discolored, then place them in a bowl and cover them with about 3 inches of room temperature water. They're going to absorb a significant amount and nearly double in size, so use a bowl with plenty of room. Soak them for 8 to 12 hours. I start mine before bed, and they're ready by morning. You'll know they're properly soaked when they've visibly plumped up, the skins have softened, and some have begun to split slightly. That little split is the first sign that germination has started. And it's exactly what you want to see. Drain the soaked beans and spread them across your cloth-lined container in a layer no more than 1 to 2 inches deep. This part matters more than it sounds. If you pile them too thick, the beans in the center don't get enough airflow and can begin to spoil before the outer ones have even properly started. Keep the layer shallow and even. Then cover the container completely, a lid, a dark cloth, a piece of cardboard, and place the whole thing somewhere with no light at all. A kitchen cabinet works perfectly, a pantry shelf, anywhere dark and reasonably consistent in temperature. If you're finding any of this useful, I'd genuinely love it if you subscribed, not because the number means something to me, but because this is the kind of content I want to keep making, and knowing it's landing with people who actually cook and grow things at home is what tells me it's worth continuing. That's the honest reason. No other one. Here's where the Korean method becomes something you can feel the difference in. And it's the part that changed everything for me when I finally understood it properly. Every 8 to 12 hours, roughly when you wake up and again before you go to bed, you rinse the sprouts. Not a light misting over the top, not a quick splash from the tap. A thorough, generous rinse of cool water poured slowly and evenly over the entire surface of the beans until water is flowing freely out of every drainage hole, and then you let it drain completely before covering them again and returning them to darkness. That full drain is not optional, it's the whole point. The rhythm of twice daily rinsing is something Korean households have arrived at through generations of doing this, and it maps almost perfectly onto a normal day. Morning rinse when you make coffee. Evening rinse before bed. In between, the beans are in the dark, doing exactly what they're meant to do. By the end of day 1, you'll see small white tails emerging from most of the beans. By day 2, those tails are visibly longer and the sprouts are starting to look like something real. By day 3, you'll have sprouts 2 to 3 inches long with plump white stems and small pale yellow tips. That's your harvest window, and if you've never grown sprouts that actually looked like that, the first time is a little startling. Temperature matters more than most sprouting guides acknowledge. The ideal range is between 68 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit, ordinary room temperature in most homes. Too cold and germination slows to a crawl. Too warm and you create conditions that favor bacteria and mold. If your kitchen runs hot in summer, find a slightly cooler spot. A basement shelf, a cabinet away from the oven. In winter, keep the container away from cold windows and drafty corners. The beans can handle some natural variation in temperature, but dramatic swings will stress them and show up in your results. Healthy sprouts smell clean and faintly nutty, almost like raw peanuts or freshly cut grass. If you notice anything sour or unpleasant during your rinsing, check your drainage first. That smell almost always traces back to water sitting somewhere it shouldn't be. I want to pause here and say something directly. If you've tried sprouting before and failed, please don't assume it's a skill you lack. I genuinely believed for years that I just wasn't good at it. The problem wasn't me, and it probably wasn't you either. It was method. The right method makes this straightforward. Leave a comment and tell me if you've tried growing sprouts before and what happened. I'm curious whether it was the same drainage issue that got me or something else entirely. I read everything that comes in. Now, the finishing detail that Korean home cooks use to get that extra snap and crispness that makes fresh homegrown kongnamul taste so different from anything you'd buy in a bag. On your final rinse, just before harvesting, use genuinely cold water straight from the refrigerator or with a handful of ice added. Pour it slowly over the sprouts and let them sit in that cold water for about 5 minutes before draining completely. This cold shock firms up the cell walls and gives the sprouts a crunch that you can actually hear when you bite into them. It's a small step that makes a disproportionate difference, especially if you're eating them fresh, blanching them quickly for a side dish, or using them in a soup where texture is everything. After the cold rinse, drain them thoroughly and store in a container in the refrigerator. They'll keep for up to a week, though honestly they're at their best within the first 3 days when that crunch is still at its peak. If this gave you something genuinely useful, if it fixed a problem you'd given up on, hit the like button and share it with someone who cooks and might want to try this. It would mean a lot more to me than you might expect. Thank you for being here.